bookmarks and bookworms, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to tell you about all of the books I've added to my Goodreads TBR this year. Now, part one of this video was filmed back in April, so I'll leave the link to that video down in the description if you haven't already checked that out. So today we'll just be talking about the books that I've added from about May till about now. So at the beginning of May, I went through a little bit of a sci-fi fantasy kick in terms of collecting books onto my TBR, and so I added on Jade City, The Final Empire, American Gods, and A Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. Several of these were book recommendations. Jade City came from Aoife over at Words of Clover. The Becky Chambers novel came from Alice and Jem. I do dabble in sci-fi and fantasy. They're not my main genre, but I do pick them up occasionally. So, for example, this month I picked up the 5th season by M.K. Jemisin, but I would say the majority of my reading is literary and also often translated as well. The next book I added was Elizabeth Haynes' Revenge of the Tide. This was after I mentioned her book Human Remains in a video, and one of you guys suggested to me Revenge of the Tide. It's also by Elizabeth Haynes. I added Lolita because I feel this is a classic that I haven't picked up and has kind of flown under my radar. I love unreliable narrators, and we live inside the mind of a person who is, I guess, unlikable because of the nature of him. And I don't want to say the exact word because I'm not sure if you're even allowed to say the word on the internet, but you guys know, I mean, Lolita is a famous book, so you all know like what the guy is, but and maybe I will hate it for that reason. I won't actually be able to get myself through the book because it's so horrific. But I have heard from other people that you can read it. It's not, you know, so offensive that you have to walk away from it. So I would be interested to see for myself how I feel about this novel. Then I picked up Patricia Highsmith's Strangers on a Train. Now, I read Peter Swanson's The Kind Worth Killing in December last year, and that apparently was inspired by Patricia Highsmith's Strangers on a Train. And so I'd really like to go back to Strangers on a Train and see if I enjoy it as much as Peter Swanson's, because I rated that thriller 5 stars last year. It was, I think, for sure my favourite thriller of 2022. Then I added James McBride's new novel, which is The Heaven and Earth Grocery Store. I did not read The Good Lord Bird, but this went onto my TBR purely because I thought it would be a Booker book this year. It was not. Pretty much none of the predictions that I thought were going to be on Booker this year were actually on there, and this is also the same for Idan Lepuki's Time's Mouth. This is more of a sci-fi bent to it, but I thought it potentially would get onto the Booker and it didn't. Whether these two remain on my Goodreads TBR remains to be seen, because I like to keep my TBR under 200, so I go through and cull books whenever it gets above that, just because I like to keep it at a manageable level. The next one I added was Hilary Mantel's Giving Up the Ghost. This is a non-fiction memoir about a career blighted by physical pain, with an imagination that supplied compensation for the life her body was denied. So I think this is going to be incredibly emotional. I've never had much experience with this, so I wonder how impactful this is going to be on me. Hilary Mantel is a wonderful author. I have enjoyed many of her works, not just the main trilogy that she is famous for. So reading a bit of non-fiction, which is normally not my thing, I think will be saved by the fact that it is Hilary Mantel, and I would love to know a little bit more about her and her life and what she did struggle with, that, you know, the vast majority of us don't. So I have this on my Kindle actually ready to go, so I wonder now, just speaking through this with you guys will actually spur me on to add it to my TBR for September. The next one I added was by Matthias Enard. Matthias Enard is one of my favourite authors, and I added this when I heard that he had a new book coming out. This book is coming out in October, and this is called The Annual Banquet of the Grave Diggers Guild. I don't think there will be a better book title released in 2023, and it's by my favourite author. I cannot wait. It's published by the brilliant Fitzcarraldo Editions. I have the pleasure of having a NetGalley e-arc of this, and so I will be getting this off my TBR and onto my finished pile very, very soon. Similarly, we have The Details. This is also a piece of translated fiction, as Matthias Enard's was as well. This is being published by Headline, and I have a NetGalley e-arc of this too. This is a queer piece of Swedish contemporary fiction, and as the cover suggests, with the fractured portrait, it is about the small moments that make up a larger life. This is a new author to me, and so it'll be all about the details, literally in this one, in the writing for me of this. That is what my opinion will hinge on. Whether I enjoy this book or not, it will be on how it is written. Then I added on 2 of Claire Keegan's short story collections in honour of her newest one being released in September this year. So Claire Keegan's Walk the Blue Fields and Antarctica are 2 short story collections that I haven't headed to yet because I generally am not a fan of short story collections, but having loved and rated both of Claire Keegan's novellas 5 stars, Small Things Like These and Foster, when I read that I think last month, I thought if I'm going to get on with anybody's short stories, it may be hers, and so potentially if I pick up these 2, I will have a better time with short stories. The next is Ernest Hemingway. I have picked up The Old Man and the Sea by Ernest Hemingway, but nothing else, and so A Farewell to Arms is the next book that I want to be heading towards of his. I don't know much about it other than that he typically wrote around the Spanish Civil War, and so I expect themes of war and historical setting and just brilliant writing. I absolutely loved the story and the writing of Old Man and the Sea, and so I expect good things out of this author, and I think he will be a favourite of mine. I can't see how he would not. Next up is Anne Enright's The Wren. This is a book on motherhood, and I thought would tie in nicely to the Booker Prize, given that the Booker Prize and the International Booker Prize both focused heavily on the theme of motherhood, and Anne Enright has been longlisted before and she's tackling the theme of motherhood, so I thought it would be in keeping with the zeitgeist and what the Booker would want, but alas no, so I will be reading this in my own time when it's released towards the latter half of this month. Then we have Amitav Ghosh's new release. He's one of my favourite authors, and this is called Smoke and Ashes, A Writer's Journey Through Opium's Hidden Histories. This is a non-fiction, but I wanted to read it because it ties into a lot of the books that he's written. So he did a lot of research for his writing of not only the Ibis trilogy, but also The Glass Palace and The Hungry Tide. They all take place kind of around the same area, not quite, but the Ibis trilogy specifically deals with the opium trade, and so this is what he would have had to have been researching, and I like his writing. I would be interested to see how his research went and what else he found out that he couldn't pack into his books. He packs a lot into his books, but it would be lovely to just spend some more time with that writer. Amitav Ghosh is just wonderful, and if you haven't picked up a book by him, then go and start with his fiction. He is absolutely a master of writing, a living legend in the modern fiction space. Justin Cronin is an author that I haven't experienced before, but he is well loved. I added The Summer Guest, The Passage and The Ferryman to my TBR. I believe The Ferryman is his latest one and The Passage is part of a trilogy. So I hope I get on with his writing. He writes sci-fi, fantasy, dystopian, thriller type books, and because of that his work is often compared to the likes of Stephen King, Margaret Atwood and Cormac McCarthy. All of those authors I've enjoyed to some extent, more or less, over the years, and so Justin Cronin is showing all of the hallmarks of an author that I would enjoy the work of, so that is why I put all 3 of them on. This next one is a piece of translated fiction. It's coming out of Sweden, and this is Atti Nan. I'm not sure if I pronounced that right, but this is a giant epic at 762 pages as it follows 2 Sami families. To my knowledge, Sami is an isolated community that live within northern territories of Sweden. I read a book several years ago that was a piece of non-fiction called Dalvi, and I believe that followed an American woman who travelled to the Sami lands and integrated herself into that community. And so I do have some awareness, I think, of this group, but it would be lovely to spend a prolonged amount of time in this community and in the world of these 2 Sami families throughout the 1900s. It's slow paced, it's about the meaning of life, and it contains a lot of sorrow and rage, which are all tick boxes for me with my books. And as I say, it has an early flag on it for next year's International Booker 2024. We may be seeing it again. That takes us down to the last 3 that I'm going to talk to you about today. One of them is another new release by Europa Editions. This is Bornville by Jonathan Coe. This came onto my radar because of the Booker. It was eligible but did not make it, and this follows a family living in Bornville, which is an area of Birmingham where the Cadbury chocolate factory was and still is. Centres around one family and their life over multiple generations, I believe. So historical fiction, but for me also is relatively close geographically in terms of the places that I have grown up around, more or less, going on trips to the Cadbury factory as a child and to the Black Country in general, which is a very working class area. There was a lot of industry that was done there, and so there's a lot of effort to preserve the culture of the Black Country and the smaller towns in that area, so Bornville being one of them. Then we have Hungry Ghosts, which again came onto my radar because of the Booker. This is by a debut Trinidadian author, and it's basically about two feuding families in 1940s Trinidad. This has stayed on my TBR because a fellow Goodreads reviewer, Jill, is one of my absolute go-tos for book recommendations. That lady can do no wrong. The books that she sends over to me through her reviews have been some of the best books of all time for me, and so when she gave Hungry Ghosts 6 stars, I thought, wow, I'm going to listen and I'm going to add it to my TBR. And Jill is actually responsible for this final book as well, which is Goat Mountain by David Vann. This is a coming-of-age American literary fiction novel. It says, in the fall of 1978, on a 640-acre family ranch on Goat Mountain in Northern California, an 11-year-old boy joins his grandfather, father, and his father's best friend on the family's annual deer hunt. In prose devastating and beautiful in its precision, David Vann creates a haunting, evocative novel that explores our most primal urges and beliefs, the bonds of blood and religion that define and secure us, and the consequences of our actions, what we owe for what we have done. So that takes me to the end of my Goodreads TBR. It is ever expanding, and so I do go through and, as I say, cull books every now and then that I feel aren't to my taste necessarily anymore, aren't calling or appealing to me as much as they potentially did when I first put them onto the TBR. My TBR stands at 199 books on Goodreads as we speak, and so it probably is time for a cull very soon if I go over that 200 mark. What is your most recent addition to your Goodreads TBR? Are you a Goodreads fan? Are you a Storygraph fan? Thanks for watching today's video, guys. Make sure to give it a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and I'll see you very soon in my next video. Bye!